We're going to be discussing the Israel-Hamas war, the Gaza ceasefire efforts. We're going to talk about how there's a potential truce in the tariff war that Trump created with China. We're going to also talk about the NATO summit, some defense spending commitments that occurred, because obviously we don't spend enough money going to the military-industrial complex as it is. So, well, we'll talk about that in a second. We also have a little bit of an escalation in Russia-Ukraine war. And then there's also a Rwanda-Congo peace deal that was made. And we'll talk a little bit about the history of that. I took some notes so we can make sure we get all the names, dates, all of it correct, because there was some learning that I needed to do about that region and what was going on. And a few other things occurred that I honestly didn't seem as being too important. But without further delay, let's talk about those things. So the very first one that we should talk about, because we talk about it quite often, is what's happening with Israel and Hamas. So I think one of the two big things that I saw come out was, number one, Israel claims that they killed the Hamas leader who was allegedly responsible for the October 7th attack. Now, it's quite unfortunate that it took us well over 50,000 civilian deaths, women and children, to get here, which I have found to be a very fascinating thing, because if you saw what happened in Iran with their targeted precision drone strikes on some of the leaders of Iran, they were able to execute them where they basically just flew a drone into a very small room or apartment building and only killed people that were in that room. And I just, first of all, I'm not condoning that by any stretch of the imagination. I don't think we should be people in the first place. But if you take a step back and look at what's been happening in Gaza, the absolute devastation and leveling of the entire area, it really begs the question and makes you think, is this their goal? Is the goal to completely wipe out that area, completely level it, destroy it, and then fund America to come in and rebuild it? Going to the people of like State Street, Vanguard, BlackRock, these names, who can come in and just like buy the land for nothing because there's nothing there, to quote Donald Trump. And so the U.S. then would just take it and then develop it and then essentially give it to Israel, our quote unquote greatest ally. And, I find it a very plan. And I think that this all was planned, because the people in charge are very smart. They're very intelligent individuals. And I don't think we can say that this is all just reaction based, because I know a lot of us think that way because of our education system, right? Our education system has taught us and ingrained in us just to react to external stimuli. And we have not been taught or trained even in thinking further down the road. This is why chess is such a great game to learn, because it forces you to think multiple moves ahead. You have to realize that these people who get to positions of power, who are presidents, who are dictators, they think multiple moves ahead. Maybe some of them get lucky and they're doing reactionary stuff, but I would argue 99.9% of them, the ones who are at the top of the top, you get there by thinking ahead. You make deals by thinking ahead. This podcast, I have a great podcast because I think ahead. I plan it out. I take notes. I read off those notes. I use those as a pathway to get where I'm trying to go, to give you guys the best experience possible. And once you realize that the people in power, whether it's the figureheads, whether there's the deep state who's pulling the strings, whoever's actually making these decisions thinks multiple moves ahead. This isn't just a reactionary thing. So when you take that into consideration, it really, really begs the question. They have finally killed the person, quote unquote, responsible, and allegedly. So will they stop now? Did they get the blood that they were looking for? Have they killed enough civilians? Because even if it was the 2,000 number, which there is a legitimate argument about, the question is did they get enough people to justify and to retaliate for what was done to them? I mean, I think it's an abomination what's happened there. I think it's war crimes. I mean, the ICC, the ICJ, they all agree that it's war crimes. I think it's going to take a strong leader within a powerful country, America, to hold them accountable. And I also find it very fascinating because Benjamin Netanyahu is currently undergoing trials for different items. I can't remember exactly what it is. Maybe I should look that up for you guys. But even Donald Trump said, "Oh, we have a great leader in Israel, a great president, a great person who's taking care of his people, who's a war hero," and all of this stuff. And he tweeted that, or he put it on Truth Social, whichever one. And I don't even know what he knows, because all he did was say that he's a great leader, a great war person, great military with Iran. He even quoted it in Iran, and it's like, dude, he started that war. He proactively attacked them, unprovoked, attacked them. And the way I see it is that it has to be the United States, because the United States is really the only true. I mean, you have Ukraine, you have the UK, you have France, you have a few other, NATO countries that support Israel, but the United States really is the one who leads that charge. And if the United States were to say, yeah, we need to issue the warrants for Bibi Netanyahu's arrest, it would be issued. And that's why you see this posturing by Trump. So I just pulled it up. Israeli Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu, he's on trial for bribery, fraud, and breach of trust in 3 separate cases. 3 separate cases. And these are stemming from investigations that started in December of 2016. And the trial actually began in May of 2020, which is crazy because we also saw, before October 7th has happened, massive protests occurring in Israel, which nobody seems to know about, or we've lost interest in for some reason. I don't know why. Maybe the October 7th was a good distraction to tell the country of Israel that they were now at war and that martial law needed to be imposed. And so you could then no longer get elections or take elections in order for them to decide if he should be the rightful leader of that country. Maybe that was a part of it. I don't know. I'm just throwing questions out there. And the point that I bring up with all of this is that after that occurred, we no longer were talking about that. The people don't want him leading their country, which I think is very important to point out. And then we have these 3 cases, apparently. So the first one's the gifts affair. So his charges are fraud and breach of trust. And the allegations, of course, is that Netanyahu and his wife are accused of accepting lavish gifts, including cigars, champagne, jewelry, and other luxury items valued at about 700,000 shekels, which is around $210,000 to $300,000. Very lofty. From the Israeli Hollywood producer Arnon Milchan and Australian billionaire James Packer between 2007 and 2016. In return, Netanyahu allegedly provided political favors, such as pressuring the Israeli finance minister to extend a tax exemption for expatriate Israelis, and which benefited Milchan, and assisting Milchan with securing a U.S. visa. Isn't that crazy that by bribing the prime minister, he could get a U.S. visa? What does that tell you about the United States government? So prosecutors claim that Netanyahu exploited his position for personal gain. Surprise, surprise, not putting the people in first. Violating conflict of interest laws. And then Milchan and Packer face no charges, and his wife is not a defendant. So that's one case. The next one, another fraud and breach of trust charge. Netanyahu is accused of negotiating a quid pro quo deal with Ernon Moses, a publisher of Yarithu Harontho. I apologize for my Yiddish or not being great, my Hebrew, whichever it is. One of Israel's largest newspapers between 2008 and 2014. The alleged deal involved Netanyahu promoting legislation to limit the circulation of Israel Hoim, a rival newspaper, and in exchange for a more favorable coverage from them. So basically, we have also recorded conversations between Netanyahu and Moses are the very central in the case. So he's bribing these quid pro quo to get favorable, media exposure, which tells you he's not a. I do not believe that the Israeli people truly want him in power anymore, and I want to really hammer that home because I think that people have been brainwashed by the media that if you're anti-Israel, then it means you're anti-Jew. People have been brainwashed to think that if you're against the Israeli government, that you hate all Jews. And I think right here, these charges coming out that he's being bribed, or he has bribed these newspapers to give him favorable coverage, and yet he still had riots against him of hundreds of thousands of people, tens of thousands at least. Who knows the actual number, but at least tens of thousands of people protesting against him before October 7th. Shows to me that the Israeli citizens don't even want him as their leader anymore. And they're very against him, at least at mass scale. It seems that way. It would appear that way from all the information I've gathered. So I think to me, it just re-ingrains to me that he's not the true leader. He's not the rightful leader of Israel at this time. And furthermore, he's created done war crimes, and clearly it seems like he's had bribery and fraud cases against him. And even this third case, it also says that it's a bribery and fraud and breach of trust. And it says that Netanyahu, as Minister of Communications, is accused of granting regulatory favors worth about 1.8 billion shekels, which is about $500 million, to Bezek Telecom Israel, controlled by this other guy, in exchange for positive coverage of Netanyahu and his family on Elevich's news website, Wally. Prosecutors allege Netanyahu acted in a conflict of interest to benefit Elevich's business interests. And this is apparently the most serious case, as it includes a bribery charge, where Elevich and his wife, Iris, are also charged and deny the allegations. So what else we have on the docket today is we have the NATO summit and defense spending commitments. So there was a NATO summit in the Netherlands on June 25th, and leaders committed to increasing their defense spending to 5% of their GDP, which initially was 2% for NATO countries, which is a significant policy win for the Trump administration. So the Trump administration, Trump saying that he wanted NATO allies to pay their fair share. And basically what he's saying, and this follows the U.S. pressure on allies to bolster their contributions amid global security challenges. So the way that NATO is set up is that it is imposed essentially that all the leaders spend, 2%. What it originally was 2%. You have to spend 2% on your military of your GDP, your gross domestic product. You have to spend that amount on your military every year. Now, also there are there are constraints. There are also constraints in the NATO contract of like what grade of military equipment you can spend it on. And ironically enough, the only people who produce that grade is the American military contractors. Think Boeing, Lockheed, Raytheon. They're the ones spending that money, or they have to essentially buy these weapons from those contractors, which is what benefits the American society. So, American economy. It's one of our biggest. It's not our biggest. We mostly do services, but whenever you talk about goods that are produced by America, military equipment is a huge part of it. And so this is something Trump has campaigned on. So it's what people wanted was NATO to quote unquote pay their fair share. But really what is happening is now you've increased the amount of money that is getting put into the military industrial complex. And I mean, I personally think that there are far better uses of that money. So by Trump saying that other people have to spend more, it also means that America's going to now have to spend more on our own military. And we, again, have so many problems at home, so many issues that this should not be a primary concern for ourselves, especially, but even just for the world as a whole, is essentially making the military industrial complex even more powerful. And that's what I see whenever I read this headline. So I mean, they're leveraging these wars that we see with Russia, with Israel, all over the world. There's tensions that are increasing with China as well. We've moved a lot of ships to the Pacific Ocean in its defense maneuver against China. So to me, I don't see our leaders taking actions that take us in a direction of peace and prosperity. And so, this is kind of like a consequence of not having strong leaders who want peace, who instead feel that it's better for whatever reason, whether it's their choices or their donors' choices, to create and continue to create these wars. And so you're seeing what the fallout is of that, which is increase your spending. And I mean, Trump wanted to do that. Whether he wanted to do it or his donors wanted him to do that, it's hard to tell, but he wanted to do that. So I mean, kudos to him for getting that done. I don't really agree with like the way that I don't it's a symptom. It's fixing a symptom. It's kind of like what our medical industry does, right? You're fixing the symptoms. You're not getting into the root cause and healing that. So that's kind of my piece on that. And I think the last one that's interesting to talk about is the Rwanda-Congo peace deal. So a peace deal was signed between Rwanda and the Dominican Republic of the Congo, or of Congo. It's not really of the Congo, it's of Congo, with some sources attributing U.S. involvement in brokering the agreement. There was a nice little photo op where Marco Rubio, who's the Secretary of State, is sitting between two elected officials, and they kind of are sitting. They're signing it, so I'm sure both of them would agree. So now this obviously is not, in my opinion, a priority for America, but it did warrant me investigating what happened in the Congo. And so just a very brief history to just inform you guys, give you some knowledge. Basically, there were a first and second Congo wars. The first one was 1996 to 97. The second one was 98 to 2003. And there's been ongoing tensions afterwards. And the background of the first one is that there was a 1994 Rwandan genocide where there was an extremist militia that killed about 800,000 Tutsis and moderate Hutus. After the Tutsi-led Rwandan Patriot Front under Paul something took over control of Rwanda, over 1 million Hutu refugees, including subsidiary militia, fled to eastern Zaire, which is now DRC, or the Dominican Republic of Congo, settling in refugee camps along the border. So then those Hutu militias who supported that person launched a cross-border attack into Rwanda, and prompting Rwanda essentially to intervene. So basically just mass occurred. 800,000 people is a lot. That's crazy. And of course, this war resulted in significant amount of civilian deaths, and estimated of tens of thousands to 200,000, and it also failed to neutralize the Hutu militias, that's just crazy. These numbers I was completely unaware of. And then I guess that eventually settled down, and then there was a second Congo war, which was 98 to 2003, where the tensions picked back up. And it became Africa's deadliest conflict, often called the African World War, which involved 9 countries, Rwanda, Uganda, and Burundi, backed the anti-Kabila rebels, while Angola, Zimbabwe, and Namibia. I'm apologizing, guys. I have not heard these words. I've only read them, so please stay with me. Back the Kabila's government. How did I not know about this? First of all, this is amazing how great our education and our news organization is that there was apparently this massive war in Africa, which some people were calling like the African Civil War, and World War, and nobody heard about it in 98 to 2003. I guess we had other priorities. So I guess the DRC has massed mineral wealth. So the fighting was concentrated in eastern DRC with widespread atrocities, including murders, sexual violence, and displacement. Someone was assassinated. Let's see here. The outcome, there was an agreement to end the war in 2002 and 2003. And they had a transitional government. So I guess afterwards there was post-war tensions, and this is kind of all new information to me, so that might be why I'm stumbling here a little bit, but hopefully you guys are getting some good knowledge in here. Um, and of course, from a humanitarian standpoint, over 5 million people were displaced in Eastern DRC as of 2025 with all of this ongoing violence. There's massive resource exploitation. And of course, as always, weak government involved. Weak government, no one powerful enough or strong enough or smart enough to actually handle or solve these crises. And I think that's just a symptom of, or maybe not even a symptom. Maybe that's the root cause of all the issues that we're seeing in the world today. Um, so yeah, so I think those are massive issues that we see throughout the entire world at this point. I think that it's really going to take strong leadership for us to fix all these things. And yeah, that alarm was for me. I got to get moving on my day, but I appreciate you all. I love you all, and I will see you all in the sixth dimension.